The first time Graham called me fragile, I laughed. The second time, I realized he meant it. He said it after our wedding too, in front of his colleagues, in that half-joking tone that cuts deeper than any insult. My little Omega can't even open a wine bottle. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But something inside me cracked that day, something that never quite healed. I used to think love could fix everything. I was wrong. Love can also be the reason you lose yourself completely. Graham and I met at Yale. He was that arrogant, straight-A alpha law student with a perfectly pressed shirt and a voice that could silence a room. I was the Omega on scholarship, sketching people at the library corners and drinking too much coffee. He walked straight into my space one evening, dropped his heavy legal textbook right onto my sketchbook, and said, "You're in my seat." I told him, I was here first. He smiled like someone who always gets what he wants. Then I guess you're in my life first too. I should have run away that day, but instead, I fell hard, fast, and recklessly. We married 5 years later, in a small courthouse ceremony, surrounded by people who didn't understand how an Omega like me could possibly fit into Graham's world. And for a while, I made myself smaller so I could. I cooked, cleaned, smiled when I was supposed to. I became the perfect Omega husband, silent, soft, invisible. Until the night he called me a liability in front of his partners. It was supposed to be a dinner celebrating his promotion to senior partner. Everyone was there, the alphas in suits, the betas with their polite laughs, and me, sitting quietly beside him. When someone asked if I'd ever thought about working again, Graham's hand tightened around his glass. "Eli prefers to stay home," he said with a smirk. "He's delicate, not really the career type." The table laughed. I didn't. That was the night I stopped being his Omega. I packed a single suitcase and left before dawn. I didn't leave a note. He didn't chase me, not then. Maybe he thought I'd come crawling back the way Omegas were expected to. But I didn't. I found a small apartment in Brooklyn, got a job teaching art at a community center, and learned how to breathe again. I thought that was the end of us. Should have been. But 2 months ago, Graham showed up at my door, soaked in rain, holding a divorce agreement with trembling hands. Except he didn't ask me to sign it. He asked me to listen. "I made a mistake," he said. "I made hundreds of them. I thought strength was about control, but you're the only thing I ever wanted to hold without breaking." I should have slammed the door. Instead, I let him in. We didn't talk much that night. He sat on the couch while I made tea the same way I used to. There was a silence between us, thick, almost alive. When he finally looked up, his voice cracked. "Do you hate me?" I didn't answer, because the truth was I didn't know. Love doesn't die just because it hurts. Sometimes it lingers like a ghost, haunting every quiet moment. He stayed in New York for a week. Every day he tried to prove he'd changed, helping at the art center, walking me home, bringing coffee just the way I liked it. And every night he'd stop at the door, as if asking permission to stay, but never daring to. One evening, after my class ended, I saw him waiting outside again, same navy coat, same tired eyes. "Eli," he said softly, "I don't want forgiveness. I just want to see you smile again." And that's when I broke. Because after everything he did, he still knew how to reach the part of me that remembered why I loved him in the first place. Still, love without respect is poison, and I wasn't ready to drink it again. So I told him the truth, every ugly, painful piece of it. How his words had made me doubt my worth. How I spent nights staring at the ceiling wondering if my life was only meant to orbit around his. He didn't defend himself. He just listened, tears slipping down his face like he finally understood the weight of what he'd done. That night, for the first time, Graham didn't try to fix things. He just said, "Tell me what you need, and I'll become it." And maybe that's the thing about love, it's not about who needs who more, but who's willing to change. We spent the next weeks rebuilding carefully, quietly. We weren't a couple again, not yet. But there was something gentler now, something fragile but real. He attended my art show, where I displayed a piece titled, "The Fragile Strong." It was a painting of two silhouettes standing apart under a sunset, just like the first time I saw him again. When he saw it, his eyes glistened. "Is that us?" I smiled faintly. It was. He took a deep breath, stepped closer, and whispered, "Can it be again?" For a long moment I didn't answer him. The air between us trembled heavy with everything we'd been, everything we might still be. The gallery lights were dim, the murmurs of visitors fading as people began to leave. All that was left was us, the painting, and the silence. "I don't know, Graham," I said finally. "I'm not the person you left behind." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm not the man who thought he had to be stronger by making you smaller." He reached out, stopping just short of touching me. The hesitation in his fingers was something I'd never seen before, not from him. The alpha who once treated confidence like a second skin. I took a step closer. "Then who are you now?" He smiled soft, unsure. "Someone who's still learning. Someone who's finally afraid to lose the only person who ever made him feel human." For a second, I wanted to hate him for how easily he could still pull at my heartstrings. But there was something different now, not arrogance, not dominance, just a quiet, genuine longing. It made me want to believe him. Over the next month, we didn't rush. We met for coffee on Sundays, shared dinners that didn't end in arguments, walked through Central Park as autumn slowly painted the trees gold. Sometimes he'd ask about my students, and I'd tell him about the kid who drew superheroes with missing capes or the teenage Omega who wanted to be a painter but was scared of being laughed at. And he'd listen, truly listen, with a kind of attention I'd never seen before. One afternoon, while we were sitting on a bench watching the leaves fall, Graham said, "You know what I used to think love meant? Control. The more I could manage, the more secure I felt. But it's not control, is it? It's trust." I smiled faintly. "You're quoting my old journal." He laughed, that deep, warm laugh I used to love. "You left it in the apartment." I couldn't throw it away. The way he said it quietly, reverently, made something twist in my chest. I didn't say anything. I just reached for his hand, not out of pity, but because for the first time, I felt like maybe he'd earned the chance to hold it again. But change isn't easy. One night, his firm invited him to a formal dinner, a charity event filled with politicians, investors, and the same type of people who once looked at me like I didn't belong. He asked me to come. "Are you sure?" I said. "You know what they'll say." He squeezed my hand. "Let them. I'm not hiding you anymore." I almost said no. The old fear, that invisible cage of judgment and whispers, tried to pull me back. But then I remembered the Omega boy from my art class who said he wanted to see someone like him stand proud in a world that kept calling him weak. So I went. When we entered the ballroom, the noise dimmed just slightly, that split second of surprise, of recognition. Some people smiled, others whispered. And then, to my utter disbelief, Graham placed his hand on my back, gently but firmly, and said to one of the senior partners, "You've met Eli, haven't you? My husband." The word husband echoed louder than the music. For the first time, I saw pride in his eyes, not the kind that demanded approval, but the kind that came from acceptance. The world didn't end. The whispers faded. And suddenly, it felt like breathing again. Later that night, while we danced under the soft glow of chandeliers, Graham leaned close and murmured, "You make me brave. You know that?" I laughed softly. "You make me crazy." "Fair trade," he said, smiling against my temple. And in that moment, surrounded by people who once made me feel small, I realized I didn't need to shrink anymore. Weeks turned into months. The divorce papers stayed unsigned, gathering dust in a drawer neither of us opened again. We still had our bad days. Arguments that flared, silences that lasted too long. But now, when things broke, we didn't run from the pieces. We sat together and rebuilt. One rainy evening, I came home from work to find him sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, our old life, packed away and forgotten. He was holding the painting I made the year we separated. The fragile, strong. "You kept this?" I asked. He nodded. It reminded me that strength doesn't always roar. I knelt beside him. Sometimes it just stays. He turned to me, eyes glistening. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you still love me?" The question hung in the air, simple, terrifying, sacred. I thought about all the nights I cried alone, the weight of words that scarred, the slow healing that followed. And then I thought about now his trembling hands, the gentleness in his eyes, the fact that he'd learned how to say please. Yes, I said softly. But this time, it has to be different. He took my hand, pressing it to his heart. Then let's build something new. Not as Alpha and Omega, just as us. And somehow that was enough. Spring came early that year. The art center held another exhibit, Reclaimed, featuring works by Omegas who'd faced discrimination and chose to fight back through creativity. I curated it with pride, and Graham helped with the legal paperwork, the donations, the press releases. On opening night, as I stood before the crowd, I spotted him in the back, his tie crooked, his smile shy. I talked about courage, about redefining strength, about how love isn't meant to cage you but to set you free. When the applause faded, he came up to me and whispered, "You were incredible." "So were you," I said, "for showing up." He chuckled. "Get used to it. I'm not leaving this time." Later, as we walked home through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, the city lights reflecting in puddles, I stopped and turned to him. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" "All the time," he said. "It reminds me of how far we've come." I smiled. "Then don't forget we're still learning." He brushed his thumb along my cheek. "Then let's never stop." We kissed under the soft drizzle, not like a grand finale, but like a quiet promise that love could survive not by perfection, but by choice. For once, I wasn't the fragile one, and he wasn't the untouchable alpha. We were just two men, scarred but standing, brave enough to start again. And maybe that's what real strength looks like, not in how tightly you hold on, but in how gently you choose to stay. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.